episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Okay, welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with another truly fascinating guest who is helping to create a better tomorrow and future for all of us. We have the honor of being joined today by Dr. Mihaela Chita-Tegmark, who is a postdoctoral scholar at Tufts University, where she currently conducts research in the Human-Robot Interaction Laboratory. With a background in both psychology and the social sciences, Dr. Chita-Tegmark is interested in the topics at the intersection of technology and psychology, such as using artificial social agents in healthcare, and the impact of emerging technologies on human social interactions and well-being. Dr. Chita-Tegmark earned her Ph.D. from Boston University in Psychology and Developmental Sciences. She's also an alumna of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she spent time studying the role of social information in children's lives, how social information influences the way children cooperate, engage in strategic decision-making, as well as on projects related to the development of social attention and language skills in children with Autism Spectrum Disorder. Dr. Chita-Tegmark is also the co-founder of the Future of Life Institute, which is a nonprofit research institute and outreach organization that works to mitigate existential risks facing humanity, including themes such as artificial intelligence, bioengineering, autonomous weapons, and also helps to promote positive uses of technology. Dr. Mihaela Chita-Tegmark, thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a real pleasure having you here, and I'd love to start off by giving you the floor like we typically do, just to hear a little bit more of your background story. If you could take us back a bit to sort of the beginning, where you grew up, how you got interested in science, in psychology, in the social sciences, and a little bit of your career path in academia to date. I think that would be a great way to start everything off.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I had a pretty convoluted path to get where I got, but that just made it more interesting. So I was born in Romania in 1985. So this was before the Romanian Revolution and during the communist regime. And even though, you know, I was 4 years old during the revolution of '89, it still left a huge impact on me those years. And also all the stories of my family. I mean, living in a totalitarian regime, it's a whole different level of experience. So as I was growing up, the entire education system was changing in Romania. So we were trying to get rid of all the, you know, sort of brainwashing that was sort of infiltrated into every single subject that was being taught, and people were really rethinking what should we teach children. So I was very excited about that. I remember I was the first generation to actually get textbooks that were not printed in Romania, that were from the UK, and we would like smell those, you know, freshly printed papers. And it really, for me, school, you know, was really this exploration, not just into knowledge, but also it was almost a little bit of already activism that I was doing. I felt that I was sort of changing the world and changing with the world in my country. So my dream growing up was not being what I'm now. It wasn't to be a scientist. It wasn't to be a researcher. What I really wanted to be was a teacher, because I felt, you know, that's the greatest power in the world. Like being a teacher, being able to change people's minds, being able to influence them through what, you know, you're teaching them, felt like the best thing ever. So, you know, I actually did end up, I was teaching in Romania. I was a 6th grade teacher before I pursued my my graduate degrees, and it was, you know, a fantastic time to, you know, think about you know, children and minds and human minds and how you can influence them and how you can enrich them. And then I, you know, had this crazy idea one day. I was like, you know what? I want to learn more. I don't want to just. So I don't want to approach teaching just as an art. You know, I don't want to just be a performer, an entertainer, but I really want to drill down to, you what is the method, what is the science behind it? So I had this crazy idea. I am going to apply to graduate school, and I am going to apply to Harvard, because that was the place where all the people in the movies were going to. I had never been to Boston before. I did not know anything really about Harvard, about the Cambridge area, anything. But I was very driven. For me, I had this idea that education is very important, and I have to go study it, and I have to do more about it. So, just out of crazy luck, I literally spent years afterwards wondering if they made a mistake, for accepting me, but they did accept me. So I packed my bags and I came to Boston, and that really, really changed my life. It was such a wonderful experience. I also, when I came to Harvard, I was thinking, okay, everything is about what you teach in a classroom. It's about, that interaction between teacher and student. And at Harvard, I discovered that no, actually, education is so much more, and you can drill into, all these other disciplines as well. So I took this class. It was called Mind, Brain, and Education, and that was my first introduction to neuroscience. And I was like, whoa, there's all this. There are all these insights that you can get, not from just interacting through language or in a one-on-one environment, but by looking at the brain and what the brain is able to do and what the brain is doing. So that sort of really set me on fire, and I figured, this is the path I want to take. There's a lot of value, obviously, in thinking about policies, but I was in a different country. I wasn't sure whether I was going to return back to Romania at that point, or whether I was going to establish myself in the US. So I felt, the best thing I can do is to study human development, study children's minds, study how they grow to interact with others, and how they really get to understand the world, and so on. So my next step was to go into developmental psychology. Mm-hmm. And there I had some, wonderful mentors who, have also given me both a lot of knowledge and at the same time a lot of freedom to play a little bit and try different things. I started being more and more interested in, the social aspects, right? The social dynamics that goes, both in teaching, but just more generally, how do people interact socially? Because I figured, this power to cooperate with others and change other people's minds and influence others is, one of our greatest powers. So how does that come to be? And I sort of stumbled. My intention was never really to go into thinking about pathology, thinking about atypical interactions. But I got this wonderful opportunity to work in a lab that was studying autism, and so I took that. I thought, wow, okay, this is an interesting way. Like, how about you look at what is atypical to understand what the typical pathway? Because sometimes, it's really hard to, when there's no way, there's no comparison to be made, it's really hard to figure out what the mechanism is. But the moment you can compare, right, with another form, another way of socializing, like in autism or in aggression, like children who have aggression problems, then you already have an anchor point, and you can say, okay, well, this is the developmental mechanism. This is how we grow to have sort of typical and productive interactions. So, but that was a very interesting move. It was sort of fortuitous. No, it wasn't necessarily intentional, but it really opened up these possibilities of working in the space of health and healthcare. And now, sorry, this is a very, I preface this by saying it was a convoluted path, but
no, it's wonderful.
In the meantime, there was something else developing in my life. So I had met my husband, and that he was one of my, great influencers on me, and the way I think, and how I see the world now. So together with him, we were we were starting to get a little bit concerned, I guess, about technological developments and how they were, being steered, and whether they were being developed in a beneficial way for people.
Mm-hmm.
So while I was studying developmental psychology, we also co-founded this nonprofit organization that you mentioned, the Future of Life Institute, which has a very simple mission. Let's use technology for good, like beneficial uses of technology. And, afterwards I started, being really, really involved in this world of advocacy and doing a lot of work around educating people about potential dangers of technology, but also about potential, benefits and great things that we could do with technology. So I started developing this craving to unite a little bit my life, which was on one hand doing pretty, standard psychology, especially, focused on slightly clinical topics, I guess, or at least a comparative psychology, and then my work in technology. So I found, the way I figured out how to merge them was, if you think about all the uses of technology, there are many that you can think are quite controversial. Maybe we'll discuss a little bit later, things like developing weapons, or even some aspects of social media and other types of technologies, which can have downsides and also positive upsides to it. But I figured, if there's anything that we sort of at least at the surface agree on, right? At least when it's first presented to us, is that we want to use technology for health. Using technology for health is something that, is generally people agree upon. It's not something that's being debated where, the US feels that this is a good idea, but China feels it's a bad idea. No, everybody wants to be healthier. So I thought, at least this, combining what I was learning about, mental health, about well-being, social well-being, with thinking about technology and merging them and trying to figure out what are the good ways. And I'm not saying that there are no controversial things in this space. There are, of course, but I think it starts from at least a good intention, right? It starts from a positive vision, which I think is very important, because there's many other things that start from a little bit more bleak visions. So yeah, I got this fantastic opportunity to work in my current lab, which is really, really amazing. It was such a journey to also switch a little bit academic culture from psychology to going into computer science and working in an engineering lab and being the only psychologist in this engineering lab and trying to figure out how, what can I contribute. At the beginning, I was a little bit nervous about that, but then I feel like I'm still finding my way. But it's been a fantastic and lovely journey, and I felt very welcomed in this community, and I'm very grateful for it.
Excellent. Yeah, a fascinating journey, to say the least. Thinking about sort of going back a little bit, you mentioned obviously you early on in your graduate and doctoral work, you focused on this extremely complex developmental condition that is autism. You wrote a lot of papers. You did this really interesting meta-analysis on social attention in autism spectrum disorder. And you point out that these children, their attention is different. They process information differently. Their social dynamic is different. Could you talk a little bit about how what you learned focusing on autism helped sort of craft your strategy, whether it was in social interaction or speech and communication, to what you're embarking upon now in terms of human-robot interaction?
Yeah, so my great dream, I think, would be to create a map. I think of myself as an explorer, and I'm going to explain a little bit what I mean by that.
Please.
Like if you take a human being, human beings are incredibly social. We are incredibly social beings. a great part of our, brain and cognitive resources are very much dedicated to social interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this theory, it's not mine, King Casas actually pioneered it, is that if you take almost any disorder, right, not just the ones that affect social aspects of functioning, but any disorder, you will find social issues. So the moment we don't function properly, it reflects itself in our social interactions. And it doesn't have to be. Sometimes there's a lot of literature, for example, showing that people who just, have some chronic conditions that are completely unrelated to their mental capacity or, speech capacity, verbal capacities, interaction capacities, emotions, none of that. It's really, maybe it's a chronic autoimmune or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Their social life suffers.
Sure.
So sometimes, so what I'm trying to say is not necessarily that the disease itself directly or the disorder that causes directly problems with social interactions, but sometimes indirectly it does so. So one of my dreams, this map would be, how can you map out all the, especially the mental disorders, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
onto the social space. So if you could create a map and say, okay, in autism, you have reduced social attention and you have, awkward interaction. In disorders that are, more related to psychopathy, you probably have like very, and you have a very skilled individual, right,
Mm-hmm.
socially, but with that lack of emotion
Mm-hmm.
and compassion and empathy. So that's probably at a different spectrum, a different place in this map, and this on the line of, I guess, empathetic kind of, interaction with others. And you can have, all sorts of other things as well. So there are three big things that I've studied. One of them was autism. That's where I started, and I was interested there very much in this idea of social attention and looking at, if it is reduced, what's causing that? Is it the case that the processing is somehow impaired, as in I just somehow all this information that I'm getting from you, your eye gaze, your facial expressions, I cannot compute them? Or it's more like lack of interest. I just don't have the drive to interact with people, therefore I'm worse at interacting. And this is a self-enforcing cycle. So I was interested in that in autism. I also studied aggression in children and aggressive behavior. Now, this is not a disorder in itself, it's a symptom of many disorders. But I was trying to figure out, again, what's the mechanism behind aggression and whether there may be several aggression types. So I looked specifically at reactive versus proactive aggression. So reactive aggression is the one where, you upset me and I will react aggressively. I have very little impulse control. I will, I will punch you physically or say bad things to you if it's verbal or social aggression. And the more proactive aggression, which is the kind where I actually have a lot of I have a lot of control, but I'm a bully. I'm the one who is imposing it on you because of some benefit that, I'm trying to get out of that. So trying to figure out, what are the precursor for that, and looking at what's happening when the aggression happens, because a lot of the measures are sort of very post factum. Like, okay, did you punch this person? Okay, you're aggressive. But there's very little insight into like what's happening in your mind at that time. And of course, we cannot take people and put them in the lab and have them punch each other, because that would be unethical. So we were trying to figure out different ways to measure that. So that's, yet another form of social interaction that was, impaired in some manner. But then, more recently, I've studied a disorder that actually at first sight shouldn't have anything to do with social interactions, which is Parkinson's disease. Right? This is a neuromotor disorder. It's basically over time your neural messaging sort of deteriorates and you're unable to move your limbs, you're unable to walk, and so on. But one of the problems that you have and that people have in Parkinson's disease is because of this motor degeneration, they get what's called facial masking. So they cannot control the muscles of their faces very well, and therefore all emotional expressions get, you know, you have a frozen, it's a mask. It's like you're wearing a mask. And that actually has a lot of that leads to a lot of problems in social interactions. You know, these people are perceived to be disingenuous. They are perceived to be, you know, angry, more upset than they actually are. So this inability to express emotions properly actually can deteriorate relationships. So again, this a little bit of a flavor of how, you know, the different problems that we have, different health conditions can lead to, you know, a very different social interaction profile. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was actually, you know, a very interesting way to approach the idea of social interaction and its functioning.
Really fascinating. And, you know, when you're thinking about the when you do have somebody, if you know, people that have experienced somebody, a loved one, or you know, a family member that has Parkinson's, and to understand, you know, the masking, the movement, and that in your case where you're studying, like, we got to try to figure out what that person is really trying to say, and they can't gesture like this, they can't, you know, make the facial movements. Really, really very interesting, and shows sort of all of this, or the broader dimension of things that we have to think about as we move further into this world of human robot interactions. It really quite interesting. The moving a little bit further into this area of social interaction, social robotics. You have this very interesting paper recently in the International Journal of Social Robotics, Assistive Robotics for the Social Management of Health, a framework for robot design, human-robot interaction research. And you talk about this, you know, this very important connection, as you were just saying, between health and the quality of one's social life. We hear about this concept of social determinants of health all the time now, and the importance of these strong social bonds. Talk about a little bit, if you would, about what you're doing here and sort of the different areas you're exploring. And at the same time, I was mentioning offline about, you know, a couple of months ago, I did a show with Dr. Hiroshi Ishiguro over at Osaka University, who's creating these Android, sort of social androids that are fairly indistinguishable. Every now and then I see an article about the sort of the social health benefits of robots. That we see somebody in a picture that sort of looks like my mother-in-law, and they're holding a robot that, you know, looks like a robot. And I'm also very interested in getting your thoughts on because you also delve into this concept of trust and how, you know, an elderly person who's experienced a robot feels about them. Talk a little bit about that dimension as well, sort of the human nature of the robot versus just a robot that's social.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, you know, social interactions, so health can impact social interactions, but also social interactions can in turn impact health. So in order for us to be healthy and, you know, enjoy, you know, good well-being, you know, the state of well-being, it's very important that our social interactions are, well, first of all, that they're there, and then that they're positive. So, you know, in thinking about this, and especially in thinking about the, you know, more complicated cycle where you have a disorder that impacts how you interact socially. So for example, autism, that might maybe, you know, reduce your level of interaction or ability in an interaction. And then the lack of that interaction, again, you know, impacting how well you're doing, you know, then it can easily get into, you know, a vicious cycle, you know, and really being detrimental to health. Or with Parkinson's, the same thing, right? For example, this is actually something that a lot of people with Parkinson's mention. Being unable to express emotions, most of the times it's positive emotions that don't get expressed through facial masking, actually leaves a lot of caregivers feeling like the person is constantly angry and dissatisfied with their caregiving. And that actually, you know, that problem in the care-receiver interaction then leads to worse care for the person with Parkinson's. So again, you can see how this can spiral into something negative. So thinking about these cycles, I was thinking, okay, how can you break them? And you know, I must preface this by saying that I love technology, but I'm not I'm not excited about technology in all its forms at any cost. I'm not one of those people who are like I don't believe in them like in a religion. I think that, you know, technology can offer fantastic tools for us to deal with a lot of our issues, and I'm very excited about exploring them. But I don't necessarily believe that every problem has a technological solution. I think sometimes actually technology can make things a little bit worse and a little bit more complicated. I also don't agree with people who are very dismissive of technology. There are a lot of people, especially that are very much criticizing social robots, and for good reasons in some ways. I mean, they're still fairly dumb and they're fairly, you know, inept at really, you know, coming anywhere near what a natural human, you know, interaction would be like. But, you know, going into this project, you know, I really thought about it. I really tried to find a way, a point of attack, you know, that felt comfortable. And the one that I found was this idea of like, what's the minimal, you know, capability, technological capability that can be used to still impact something in a good way, right? To nudge things in a good direction. So instead of thinking about, okay, when are we going to have these like wonderful social robots that are going to be able to, you know, talk to us about everything and understand all of our preferences and our, you know, cultural sensitivities and all of that. I was thinking more in terms of, okay, with the capabilities that we already have, how can we impact it for the better? And yeah, this was, you know, this led to this project that you mentioned, which was mostly it was a review of the literature, trying to see what are the capabilities that we have that we can, you know, use specifically for the social management of health. And the social management of health is actually a term coined by one of my collaborators, Linda Tickle-Dengen. She works, she's in the occupational therapy department at Tufts, and she works a lot with people with Parkinson's. And it's this idea that you know, in order to manage your own health, just like you manage your medication taking and your, you know, your treatment and your visits to the doctor, you also have to manage your social life, your interaction with your, you know, making sure you have a good support system, that you have friends, that you have you know, proper caregivers and so on. So this was her, you know, this is her idea. And I was like, okay, how can you introduce technology in the space of social management of health, of managing the social world around you for the benefit of your health? And, you know, I thought a lot about it. I think a lot of people, you know, a lot of roboticists, when they think about that, the first thing that comes to mind is a robot companion. Like, you need somebody to keep you company, you know, all these lonely people that, you know, are in hospitals or in, you know, all these elderly who are in nursing homes. Wouldn't it be nice if they had companionship? And here, have a robotic companionship, because the human companionship is either, you know, unavailable or, you know, I don't know, undesirable by younger people and so on. And I feel very uncomfortable with that. I find that, you know, at some level, it just erodes this very, you know, sort of very basic thing that we've evolved to do, which is to interact with people, right? We don't want to replace people. But that being said, I think there are better ways in which we can use technology. And one of the ways I was thinking about it is maybe we can use robots and technology to actually encourage human-human interaction rather than having a robot replace the human. What if you could have a robot that helps? And people do this for people all the time. Like there's this literature on social brokering, which really means, for example, if you imagine you're a matchmaker, a person who makes two people meet and fall in love and so on, or this function of being a wingman, when you go to a bar, or being an advocate for a certain person, or even somebody who networks for you, as in like they introduce you to the right people to get the right job. So humans do that kind of thing all the time, that humans create abilities for others to interact with others, connect them, and I was thinking, is there any literature, has anybody really tried to look at robots like that? Maybe they can just broker some of these interactions that need to happen, or or help these interactions, support them in some way. So I did this review of the literature, looking specifically not at human-robot interaction in this dyad, but human-human robot interaction, right? So thinking of it as a triangle, how can the robot help? And there's a little bit. It's a growing field. Right now, I think it's very scattered across very many different little topics. In the paper, I tried to sort of put them together in something coherent. But I think that is a much more promising way of looking at the role of social robots, rather than thinking of them as our peers and companions, thinking of them as our helpers. So, for example, their robots, I think you were talking, I don't know which robot you were talking about, but maybe you were talking about the para robot, which is this plush seal, robot that interacts when you touch it. Anyway, it's one of the more widely used robots in sort of in a caregiving setting. So it looks like a baby seal.
Yeah, it's something like I'm thinking back.
It has these like super googly eyes, and it's just very adorable.
Right.
And it makes sounds and reacts to you touching it and so on. And people have introduced it in nursing homes, and they've gotten some pretty good results. With people actually enjoyed interacting with Paro, and their stress levels were reduced. But what was more interesting to me from those studies was not so much the fact that people enjoyed interacting with the robot, but they also showed that people started interacting with each other around the robot. So there was this like thing that was brought, that really encouraged a lot of communication between other people. And they have these very cute, very typically, psychological measure of, like operationalized measure. They were looking at how much time people spent in the common room where in a nursing home. So how much the elderly spent in the room where all of them would meet before and after they introduced Paro, the robot. And they noticed an increase in wanting to be around the robot and around other people, because the robot gave them a great opportunity to something to talk about. Now, you could ask, well, what if it had been something other than the robot, maybe another thing? That's something, it's a control study that I think would be very interesting to make. If there's another piece of novel technology, would that have the same effect? But, for whatever's worth, right, that was a positive impact on social relationships between people. And I think, those are the kinds of things that I'd like to see more of, and the less of the let's replace replace humans altogether.
Very interesting, really interesting. One other thing I just wanted to ask briefly about, I know it's somewhat off the beaten path before we talk about future of life. What other very interesting piece that I saw you write a few years ago, and there's actually a little, almost like a video tutorial that went along with it. It was on infant ECG, or electroencephalography. I was just, I know that is less involved in sort of the social interaction stuff. I was just fascinated by that. Is that a growing area of research that, and what kind of things do we find out from infants when we study their brains nowadays? Like, what are the hot topics that folks are looking at that level?
Yeah, so this was some work I did with a lab at Boston University, Amanda Tarullo's lab, and she is very interested in how social abilities develop in children with high socioeconomic status and people in low socioeconomic status. So that was the comparison she was interested in. And the specific one that you're talking about was looking at one aspect of social interaction, which was social attention.
Yep.
So the idea was, could you find something different in the brain already in the infant when you talk about social attention? And, what is social attention? Well, social attention is, when I look at you, I make eye contact with you, or like try to engage you, then I point or I show you something, it doesn't have to be pointing, and then I get an acknowledgement for you. So the idea is, joint attention. It's like you and I both attend to this thing. And it's super important for, for the development of language, it's crucial to have this element functioning properly in order to learn new words. How else am I gonna, be able to know that this is a glass, unless, mommy showed me, said glass and pointed and, so, and it's important for all sorts of other things. Actually, even later in life, there are a lot of studies that show that, if you try to predict sort of the happiness of a relationship, romantic relationship, you look at moments of joint interaction and how much people attend to. So if you and your partner get joy out of, experiencing the world together, and when your partner tries to show you something, you try to pay attention, you're not on your phone, then that predicts better chances, in romantic life than if you don't attend to whatever the partner is pointing at. So that's just to say, long way of saying social joint attention is very important for a social life. So she was looking at this, and all of these brain pathways developed very early on. And the other interesting twist to this project was that she was also getting salivary cortisol levels. So she was trying to figure out. So cortisol is a hormone that you secrete when you're stressed out. And some amount of it is good. Like in the morning, we have a spike of cortisol that help us get pumped up and ready to go. But too much of it is actually problematic. And it's been shown that in children from families that are struggling, either financially, or that come from families with low socioeconomic status and that have more difficulties in their life, that cortisol, well, as you'd expect, is higher. And cortisol can have, influences on how your brain develops. And she was trying to figure out whether these cortisol signals, like the cortisol amounts that the infants were producing, were in any way related to the development of joint attention and joint attention pathways. So the EEG was basically, measuring activity in the brain when it was an instance of joint attention. So basically, just to demystify it, it was basically one of us, one of the experimenters who was sitting there and, pointing towards all sorts of interesting objects for the children. And we were trying to figure out, okay, what's happening in the brain during this period of time and what activity. Got it. How much activation there is. Yeah.
No, I thought it was a really cool little video. And then I've been thinking, well, obviously before pandemic, but the amount of kids that age that I see with iPads in front of them at restaurants nowadays, and they make me wonder,
it's really crazy. Yeah, and I mean that the reason you saw that video is because of this fantastic journal, Jovi, that actually. Right. What they do, which is very useful for the academic community, research community more generally, not just the academic community, is that they actually film the protocol. So a lot of the times, and this is good for the general public as well. Like when you read a paper, usually people will read, or for students especially, when you're assigned a paper, you'll read the introduction or maybe the discussion and the conclusion. But I think what's really the most important thing is the method, because then you can make up your own mind whether you're, convinced by the findings, convinced by the interpretation. And what Jovi does is they film to you. They say, okay, this is what happened. This is what this whole interpretation is based on. And whenever I teach, I like to tell my students, like, I really want to dissect the methods and teach them how to dissect the methods of a paper, and not just think about the general concepts, because many times you're like, I'm not sure if this really says what you think it's showing or you think it's saying. So Jovi does a great, it's just a wonderful way of having it almost instantly, very easily without having to try to picture what's going on, in the experiment. You actually have it, like it's recorded, and you can watch it and understand what actually went on in the lab.
Yeah, really cool platform. Yeah, really neat stuff. Let's go on to Future of Life Institute, which, again, this is when you're not doing everything else you're doing, you focus on this. You co-founded it with your husband, famed cosmologist Max Tegmark. You have the Skype co-founder Jan Tallinn. I think Elon Musk has put some money into this, looking at, as you were saying early on, the risks, but also the potential for technologies, bioengineering, autonomous systems, and of course AI for what could probably be a problem, but what is used for good. And as we were talking offline a bit too, I've done a lot of shows recently on sort of what I'll call AI for good, drug development. We did a show with the McCormick Spice Company where they're going to use AI to do new flavoring packets. I did an AI in whiskey production recently. And so AI is showing up everywhere, kind of good. Obviously, there's those that are, Terminator oriented and so forth. Talk about a little bit about the Institute, how you came about setting it up, and sort of what you decide to work on any given day when you have meetings or your breakout sessions, and talk about the next big things that are coming along.
Yeah, so the Future of Life Institute was, it was and continues to be a fantastic adventure for me. And, it's also just for people who are interested in a little bit more spice, it's also like a very fantastic romantic sort of endeavor, because as you said, I did this together with my husband. So when I'm sorry, now it's good. I'm getting into the more mushy,
go ahead.
mushy aspects of my life. But when I met my husband, I was, he's a physicist, as you said, and he's incredibly passionate. Now actually he doesn't much more. He's shifted a lot of his research to artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
But when I met him, he was deep into cosmology, and he's very passionate about everything that he does. Like, he's very, very passionate about his research. That's his life. So when I met him, I felt that, how is our relationship going to work? Because I come from social sciences, education. Like, how am I going to be able to understand what he's all about? So then, it was really fantastic to be able to do something together. And the Future of Life Institute was this wonderful thing where we brought our visions together. So he brought this, perspective of, cosmological perspective. For him, he thinks in billions of years, time. I think of, in terms of, I don't know, on a much smaller scale, the human time. And he thinks about these, big questions of life, and, what intelligence is, at the level of, what are the mathematical, equations and structures that actually describe intelligence and consciousness. And I think of it, from the, what does this actually mean in an interaction setting, in the social world, in the, near world that we live in. but it was a wonderful, wonderful joining of forces. So we were becoming, as I said, more and more concerned about technological development. And for a good part of human history, our technologies, made us more powerful than other species, but not powerful enough, I guess, to really cause a lot of damage. But really, in the past, few decades, we've had this amazing technological growth that makes us very powerful, and that power can be used to do good things, but it can also be really destructive. So when we want to do good, we can do a lot of good, and when we want to destroy something, we can really create a lot of mess. So in 2014, Max had just published his first book, and he was thinking that at that point that he would have so much more time, and that that didn't turn out to be correct. He didn't have that much more time, but he was thinking, okay, I cannot. It was New Year's Eve, and going from 2013 to 2014, and it was like Max was like, I just cannot. I feel like I keep complaining, like all I do is complain about the state of the world, the state of technology, how recklessly we develop this technology. I need to do something about it. We need to do something about it. So that was the conversation that started all other conversations, and then we sort of got a bunch of other people to join us. Anthony Aguirre from Santa Cruz, who's a longtime collaborator of Max's, Victoria Krakovna, who was a student at Harvard at that time, and she was like super idealistic. Now she works for Google DeepMind and continues to be very idealistic and a really wonderful force for good. And Jan Tallinn, who's one of the creators of Skype, who was also intrigued by these ideas. So we got it together, and really the first few months of FLI were really meetings in our living room, with me cooking for 3 hours for 20 guests who would gather and brainstorm ideas and trying to figure out what would be the possibilities to do something about this. And one of the things that so we were trying to classify the different types of technologies and consider which ones would have most impact and which one could be steered into the right space. So nuclear technology, we do a lot of effort. Actually, yesterday was the entry into Force Day, which is a big celebration for all people who are who are speaking against nuclear war and for nuclear disarmament.
Okay.
I can talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
What that is that the Future of Life has supported it. But at that point, and in biotech, at that point, it was a little bit unclear. We also didn't have a lot of bandwidth, but AI was something that, was like, everybody was like, yes, let's do something about that. So we organized our first conference, which was like a big deal because, going to a different field and saying, hey, by the way, do you want to organize a conference about safety in your field? And they're like, thank you very much. We'll organize our own if we want to. But it took a lot of persuasion and a lot of, trying to get people together. And as you said, Elon Musk attended that, and then that led to, starting the first grants program in AI safety that we spearheaded with the Future of Life Institute, and I'm actually very proud of that. And then we've evolved from there. We're small, but we work a little bit opportunistically in the sense of whenever there's an opportunity to do something good, to move the needle towards beneficial of the use of technology, we do that. And yeah, one of the opportunities was so the UN. This is not, you'll not find this in the news because countries who have nuclear weapons probably don't like to talk a lot about this, but the UN has actually, countries in the UN have actually voted to have a ban on nuclear weapons. So, and today, 50 countries have ratified this ban, and so it enters into force. Actually, we're 52 right now. But yeah, this is the day that marks The rest of the world is
Okay.
claiming that nuclear weapons, or rather these 50 countries who have ratified it, and a lot of others who are going to ratify it soon, have signed this ban. So according to a good part of the world, nuclear weapons are illegal as of yesterday. And we're all celebrating that. But of course, you know, the US is probably not going to sign this. Russia is probably not going to sign this. The UK is not going to sign this. But I think it sends a very important signal to everybody that this is something that the world wants, and that, you know, it's a signal and a stigma on these kinds of inhumane weapons that we're still stockpiling and you know, managing very poorly, I would say.
Really neat. Really neat, and thank you for the scoop. I hope I'm getting the scoop on that one, but that's a fascinating one. Yeah, along those lines, and you know, based on your expertise in the social sciences and psychology, I wanted to ask you one quick question, because something you brought up at the beginning, and if you can indulge me, I have a quick story about something, and I want to get your feedback. About a year ago, when the whole COVID pandemic was beginning, I did a show with Dr. Tara O'Toole, who at the time had just stepped down. She was Undersecretary for Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. She is now at Inc-Intel, the intelligence community sort of venture capital fund, MD from Georgetown, Master's in Public Health from Johns Hopkins, and her main thing is bioweapons and countermeasures in this whole domain. We didn't discuss anything about sort of where COVID came from. It was just a discussion on diagnostics and what we should be doing in pandemics and so forth. The show went up, and 3 months later, somebody at the YouTube organization decided that it violated the message, and it came down, never to be seen again. And you know, you and I could sit here for probably the rest of the time and watch videos on how aliens created COVID, or the Illuminati, or some a range of other nonsense. I'm very concerned, or I'm not concerned myself. That's just an example. But as you think about artificial intelligence and bioengineering and nuclear, what are the issues that you talk about with regard to social media and the powers that be, whether they are some artificial intelligence algorithm or somebody behind the scenes that's saying, yes, this goes and this does not go, in sort of our cultural social intelligence on certain matters? And I'm sorry for that long-winded question, but please take your time with it.
Yeah, this is a very sort of both timely and very serious topic to discuss. I think that a lot of the technologies that were intended for, you know, social interaction, connecting people, right, communication, and so on, have had like a lot of unexpected and detrimental effects. Like we talk about filter bubbles, right, that have been created, you know, even kinds of you know, censorship that can, you know, propagate through these, and I think a lot of people did not, and this is true of a lot of technologies, you know, we develop them and then oops, you know, well, we should have thought about, we didn't think about this, we couldn't have foreseen this. And I think that we really have to cultivate a culture of, no, we actually have to think through everything, not just jump into things and, you know, do them without thinking, but have a way of very systematically thinking about the consequences. With regards to specifically, you know, sort of who decides what is being shown and who decides what information we get, I think this is important. Remember, you know, we're coming full circle in a way. I was talking at the beginning about how important I thought it was. What you teach people is so important. It has so much power. And I think the, you know, totalitarian regime that I was born in knew that very well, and it used it, you know, very skillfully, I would say, to indoctrinate people into thinking this and thinking that and manipulating them. And I think today too, we see a lot of instances of people being, you know, manipulated and truth being told, and, you know, well, sometimes not being told, and
Yeah.
sometimes being presented with the very strange angles and through very strange lenses. One thing that I'm a little bit involved in, but this is probably something that my husband could speak more to, is we've noticed this, and this is not part of the Future of Life Institute per se, but it is another effort that we're interested in, is how do you improve the media? And I think, a lot of people are very dissatisfied lately, and there's a lot of discontent with the media, but there's very few ideas of like how to fix it. So we're working right now, it's a very preliminary stages on this project that we call Improve the News, which is a way to, understand and highlight and point out bias that is happening in the media and in reporting, and giving people a chance to correct some of it, and not being, sort of completely dominated by the, establishment view of everything, but actually having a space for a critical stance on some issues. I mean, including issues about technology, but also just more broadly about the state of the world. So yeah, if you you can check out the improvethenews.org if you're interested in org. So this is this little platform that is supposed to take you a little bit out of your filter bubble. So it's not it doesn't try to convey any particular message to you, but it lets you have control over what you consume. So when you go to Improve the News, you will see that you can actually, try to, you can look at the media on the left-right political spectrum and get both views. You can, you can play with that and try to see a little bit how people who are only consuming, right-wing media versus left-wing media are thinking. And I think that's a way to just break a little bit out of your filter bubble. And another, filter bubble that we have is this on the spectrum of, pro-establishment versus critical of the establishment. So some of the mainstream media and what kinds of things they are reporting, and some of the media that is critical of the establishment and what kinds of things they are reporting. So this doesn't tell you what to do, what to look at, but it gives you the opportunity, if you want to see other points of view, and it makes that easy. So that's something that we've been working on. I mean, this is primarily Max, but I've a little bit in the shadows of that as well, and helping out as much as I can. I think this is something that we're going to be sort of working more on and trying to figure out more. And another, now that we're talking about this topic, there's another project actually led by Anthony Aguirre, in part our co-founder from the Future of Life Institute, which is taking another approach to all this sort of truth finding, which he has another, it's Metaculous, it's called, you can Google that also. That's a different platform where you can actually look at predictions that people make. So the idea is, how can you collect the intelligence of the people around the world and look at facts, look at things, verifiable facts, just like in science, about the world. So for example, all sorts of questions like, but questions that don't necessarily, for example, when will we have an AGI and what year? And people are trying to predict this, and their collective intelligence is aggregated, and you can see what people's predictions are, and you can see people who make good predictions, what their thoughts are. So the idea there is, how can you reduce a lot of this noise, a lot of this opinion giving, and reduce it to, verifiable facts, things that you can actually check later and see, did this happen or did this not happen? And how can you try to anticipate what is going to happen using, collective intelligence, using the intelligence of a lot of people working together. And, it has a very interesting user base, and a lot of people who have, earned a lot of reputation, for being good predictors. Anyway, it's sometimes, honestly, instead of checking the news, I like to check that instead, because it gets a little bit out of the noise of what this person believes and what that person believes, and it actually presents to you important facts in this very verifiable way. So those are two I guess efforts that we're trying to develop, and then with the Future of Life Institute also, we're trying very hard to convey more of the message about responsible use of technology, and that's another way in which we're trying to educate people and try to engage people in this very important conversation that we're having. Well, what do we do with all the wonderful things that we are creating? How do we make sure that they are wonderful, that they stay wonderful? And that's a big thing. That's not an easy thing, but I think it's a very important thing to do.
Absolutely. So, okay, improve the news and Metaculous. I'll have to check those out. Definitely.
Metaculous.
Metaculous.
So,
okay. I thought it was net. Okay.
So check them out, and play a little bit with it. And again, the stances that they take is very neutral. We don't, even with the Future of Life Institute, I guess the only thing that we're saying is that the future of life is good. We want it to exist, but it gives you, it empowers you to consume media in a more sort of, I guess, controlled way, like controlled by you.
Got it. Wonderful. One final question. I'm really thankful for your time today. Typically we will get contacted after doing these shows by the younger folks in the audience that maybe they're in their senior year of high school, maybe they're just starting out in college. They'll see and listen to you, and they'll be like, you know what, I want to be like Dr. Mihaela Chita-Tegmark. I want to work with her one day. What should I be studying? Should I study psychology, the social sciences, education? What would you suggest to some of the people that call you up and be like, hey, I'm just starting out, but in a few years I want to come work with you at Tufts. I want to come work with you at the Future of Life Institute. Give those folks a little advice of what they should be doing.
I think that whatever people study, I think there are many ways to connect almost any discipline to doing great things in the world. I think it's more a matter of finding it in you, that desire, that drive to make a change. When I joined the Future, when I co-founded the Future of Life Institute, I was the only founder who had a background in social sciences, and I was like, what am I going to contribute to this? Like, I don't know. This is all a bunch of techies that are, getting together and talking about this. But then I figured out that actually the fact that I am different, and that I have a different perspective, that can be incredibly valuable. So I'd say, find something that you're passionate about and do it. But at the same time, don't lose track of the things that are very relevant today. So one of the things that, for example, changed the way I think about a lot of things, actually, the way I approach science, the way I approach even life sometimes, although I know that's a good thing, is having learned how to code. And I learned that late in life. I think I learned it it was my first year of graduate school. I had not, I started from zero. I didn't know anything. Like I never, ever written a line of code. And, I'm not a good coder, but having, that, at least at the understanding, having at least a little bit of an idea of what coding means and what talking to a computer, what interacting with a computer means, but not through the fun interfaces, but really at inside the belly of a little bit, not the hardware, but the software. having that insight has really, you know, changed my perspectives on a lot of things. So what I would say is, you know, learn the things that are relevant, but also think about how you can, you know, bring things. Don't be intimidated. Don't be like others. Try to find what you're passionate about and bring that perspective to bear on the big challenges that the world is facing right now.
Wonderful message, an excellent message. It's been really fascinating listening to you and your journey and everything you're doing in this sort of frontier space, and you know, really thanking you for taking the time to share with us. For everybody that's going to be watching this video on the YouTube channel or listening across the podcast, you've been listening to Dr. Mihaela Chita-Tegmark, postdoctoral scholar at Tufts University in the Human Robotics Interaction Lab, also co-founder of the Future of Life Institute. Mia, thank you for taking the time once again, for sharing your knowledge, for doing what you do. And as we say, thank you for helping to create the better tomorrow, the better future for all of us. It's been really inspiring and a great time with you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for, you know, giving me this opportunity and having this wonderful podcast so that we can, you know, encourage and inspire and excite other people to join us in making the world a better place. So thank you again so much.
Wonderful.